ingenious way of crafting a great final moment and adding to a game's replayability is to include multiple endings. The only problem is that it often leaves titles missing out on nice official conclusions. Thankfully, the true ending can become clear thanks to the plot of a direct sequel or comments made by the devs. The following canon conclusions all have something in common though, they all have horrible ramifications. Spoiler warning is in full effect because I'm Sai for WhatCulture.com and here are 10 terrifying true endings in video games. Number 10, Blood Omen Legacy of Kain. The Legacy of Kain series is about as gothic as video games come. Its setting, Nosgoth, is full of vampires, violence, horror and unpleasantness, and come the end of the first game you can opt to fix this or make it even worse. Sadly, those who chose the former were unpleasantly surprised when booting up the sequel. In Blood Omen, you play as the titular Kain, an anti-hero vampire who seeks revenge on those who murdered him. After finishing the game, players are given the option to pick between the Damn the World and Heal the World endings. The Damn ending causes the pillars of Nosgoth to collapse, turning it into a wasteland ruled over by the now fully villainous Kain, whereas the other shows Kain sacrificing himself to restore the world and eradicate vampires. Of course, the game's sequel Soul Reaver had to exist in a world with vamps roaming about, thus no matter what option you chose in Blood Omen, Kain will damn Nosgoth and become its brutal leader come the sequel. Kain went on to be the main antagonist of the next two games, proving that picking the bad ending has consequences and that selecting the good one is sometimes futile. Number 9, Far Cry 5. There are 3 ways your playthrough of Far Cry 5 can end. One is one of the franchise's now infamous wait for a little while secret endings. Another is the walk away ending, which sees you seemingly fall victim to Joseph Seed's brainwashing, killing Sheriff Whitehorse. But then there's the resist ending, which concludes with nuclear power destroying everything, and somehow that last one is considered the good option. This nihilistic and terrifying ending comes after you choose to resist Joseph Seed in the game's climax. You'll take part in a bonkers boss battle, and after you've beaten him, hell will be unleashed. As Joseph is arrested, you witness a bright flash in the distance and see a nuclear explosion. After trying to escape, you eventually find yourself in a bunker with Seed, who confirms that this was the collapse the cult was waiting for. It's a pretty horrid way to end a game, but making it even worse than that is, according to multiple developers and the spin-off sequel Far Cry New Dawn, this is the true ending. New Dawn is set 17 years after these events and confirms that in the chronology of the games, Joseph Seed managed to achieve his new world. Maybe he ought to change his name to Joseph Oppenheimer. Number 8, The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. Using the term true ending in the messy Legend of Zelda timeline is about as concrete as using inflatable bricks to build a house. One of the most divisive segments in the timeline is the 3-way time split, with each path considered canon. Tragically, one is less pleasant than the others. For the uninitiated, there are 3 diverging paths in the Legend of Zelda timeline that occur depending on the ending to Ocarina of Time. This split is governed by the outcome of Link's battle with Ganon. If he wins, then hooray, the villain is thwarted and Link is sent back in time to relive his childhood, leading to Majora's Mask, which is pretty dark. Unfortunately, the world he left behind soon floods, and bish bash bosh, you've got the Wind Waker, but also the world has flooded, so that's pretty dark. However, in the universe where Link fails to defeat Ganon, known as the Fallen Hero timeline, the land of Hyrule falls into true decline. This leads to games like A Link to the Past and the original Zelda, explaining why the lands are so barren and empty. It's a nightmarish outcome where Link is killed and Hyrule is doomed by Ganon. So for the residents of Hyrule, this is absolutely the worst ending of Ocarina of Time, but for gamers it's not so bad because it did give us A Link to the Past, so you know, swings and roundabouts. Number 7, Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly. The Fatal Frame series is criminally underrated, and many argue that Crimson Butterfly is the pièce de résistance of the franchise. You can see this in the game's poignant and touching story, which follows a pair of twins who explore an abandoned town only to be attacked by dangerous spirits. This abandoned village was damned after a failed sacrificial ritual led to a hellish abyss shrouding darkness over it. During the game, Mio and Mayu are targeted as new sacrifices for the ritual with the hopes of saving the village, and there are multiple ways it can go down in the end. In the Crimson Butterfly ending, Mayu accepts her fate and encourages Mio to complete the ritual. She does so, strangling her older sister and watching as her body is flung into the abyss. Mayu then becomes a Crimson Butterfly who a distraught Mio chases with tears and apologizes to. Later, Mio is found sitting in the revived village. As the screen goes black, Mayu whispers, "Didn't we promise each other? Together forever." While the village is saved, it's still devastating to see the twins torn apart, and the terror of Mio living with the guilt is horrible. This touching yet devastating ending was officially canonized in the follow-up game Fatal Frame 3 The Tormented. Number 6, Metro 2033. The terrifying true ending of Metro 2033 is another example of why gamers can't have nice things. Metro is an incredible series that equally gives you a fun time and makes you feel bleak despair. If you don't believe it, then you've just got to look at how the sequel Metro Last Light approached the ending of Metro 2033. The first title measures your actions throughout the game in the climax, evaluating the good and bad decisions you made. This impacts the ending, allowing you to either spare or annihilate the Dark Ones, a race of misunderstood creatures descended from humans. Any goody two-shoes will know that sparing them is the right call, ending the game on an optimistic note. But that's not the decision the lead character ultimately makes, as the sequel takes place in a world where these creatures were obliterated. It even actively criticises the decision to attack them, which must have been salt in the wound for those players who actively chose not to. This ending also has the distinction of being the closest the game provides to the conclusion of the original Metro 2033 novel by Dmitry Glukhovsky, so add that onto the horrifying pile too. Number 5. Doki Doki Literature Club. On the surface, Doki Doki Literature Club is a Japanese high school dating sim that is super cute and fluffy. Oh, look at it. But under that surface is an experimental meta horror that messes with your expectations. The mind-melding game concludes with one of your romantic options, Monica, becoming sentient and causing violent chaos. After deleting her, Sayori will take her place as the president of the Literature Club, only to also gain sentience and become a new Monica. This leads to the game being deleted and the cycle beginning anew. However, passionate players can achieve the game's best ending by reloading their saves and romancing all of the characters. This still causes Sayori to take over and become sentient, but instead of turning evil, she thanks the player and wishes them a fond farewell. Of course, this is technically the game's happy ending, as it sees the cycle broken and peace restored to the Doki Doki verse. When you step back and think about it, this ending is just as terrifying. It implies that Sayori is now entirely self-aware and is doomed to remain so forever, so putting the game down and closing your Steam library sticks her in an eternal darkness until you open it back up again. Does that really seem like a happy ending to you? Number 4. Drakengard. Drakengard looked at Zelda's branching timeline and said, "Hold my beer," using one of its climaxes to split off and start an entirely new franchises. So how does an ending transition from a fantasy RPG into the post-apocalyptic Nier? Well, let's just say it isn't pretty. Drakengard, a fantasy game based in a world called Midgard, comes complete with 5 different endings. In Ending E, the hero and the final boss are transported by a mysterious portal from the fantasy setting to Tokyo in 2003. There, the player takes part in a battle against the terrifying Queen Beast in modern-day Japan. As if the ravaging of Tokyo wasn't enough, the ending adds insult to injury by having the protagonist and his dragon ride mowed down by a fighter jet after the fight is complete. However, the real kicker with this one is that after you win, the deceased body of the Queen Beast turns to ash, spreading chemicals that create white chlorination syndrome, an incurable disease leading to a devastating apocalypse. The first Nier game takes place years after this in a ravaged world. Near, far, wherever you are, there's no denying that Ending E left the world in a nightmarish state. Number 3. XCOM Enemy Unknown. Alien invasions in video game franchises are as abundant as bullets in a John Wick film. The iconic XCOM series makes its bread and butter with the idea of humanity putting on a brave front against terrible planetary invaders. However, the second game does put a real dampener on the human spirit. XCOM Enemy Unknown ends with, should you finish the challenging game, Earth fighting off the onslaught of the aliens and coming out victorious. But this was completely disregarded in the sequel, as XCOM 2 is based in a world where these aliens did what most never could. They conquered Earth. This means the canon ending to the first game will always end in a totalitarian alien takeover, no matter how well you play. Making this one even more tragic is the fact that the players, yes, the players, were entirely responsible for this. The developers saw the success rate of the game's data and noted that the vast majority were unable to win the war against the aliens, so they decided to use this to inform the canon ending where humanity lost. It's safe to say that if a real alien invasion comes, we don't want XCOM Enemy Unknown players in charge of defense. Number 2. Silent Hill 2. Silent Hill 2 is a game many developers can learn from, and if they're looking for a lesson in multiple endings, they can't skip this class. The iconic Konami game contains multiple conclusions ranging from tragic to hilarious. It runs the gambit from the protagonist James Sunderland escaping the titular town but restarting the cycle of tragedy, to a Shiba Inu being revealed as the mastermind behind everything. Still, there is one ending that is undoubtedly the most depressing, and whilst it may or may not be officially canon, it's the one that both fans and developers point to. The in-water bitter ending, as it's known, follows James as the guilt of killing his wife consumes him. His punishment in Silent Hill isn't enough for him, and so he drives his car into Luca Lake, ending his life. It's a truly horrifying conclusion that abandons any semblance of hope and delves into pure nihilism. When this ending lines up with the heart-filled reading of Mary's letter, not even the most stone-hearted player can keep the tears in. Multiple developers have openly proclaimed that it's their true ending, and additionally, the novel based on Silent Hill 2 also picks it out as its final note. Number 1, I have no mouth and I must scream. If you've had the pleasure of playing this 1995 point-and-click video game, you've been subjected to one of the bleakest stories ever made. Nowhere is this more evident than in the terrifying fate of the characters come the end. This sci-fi game places you in a world ravaged by a supercomputer known as AM, who destroyed humanity and keeps 5 humans alive to torture them. The game has 7 endings, almost all of which feature a devastating conclusion where the last character you played as faces a fate worse than death. In most of the endings, AM turns the player into a great, soft jelly thing, incapable of taking their life and forever stuck in a painful existence with no mouth to let out their screams. However, if you're resourceful enough, you can avoid this and achieve the game's best ending, destroying the supercomputer and making Earth habitable again. The thing is, it doesn't matter if you manage to outwit AM, as that's not how the story truly ends. No matter what you do, the true ending will always be the one where the humans face their horrible fate, as that's how the original story by Harlan Ellison finishes. I mean, why do you think it's called I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream? The power of the source material and the written word forever dooms this story to one of the most depressing video game endings ever made. Unsurprisingly, considering the word terrifying is in the title, this game featured a lot of horror games, and if you like horror games, you might enjoy this rundown of 10 incredible indie horror games nobody played. Make sure you like this video, leave a comment down below on other examples of terrifying true endings. Head over to whatculture.com for more content every day. I've been Cy for What Culture, and have a good week.